Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn webinar, Hot Topics in Immigration Law During the Biden Administration. I'm Patricia Narciso, Director of Strategic Partnerships at Community Legal Services in East Palo Alto. We're thrilled to have so many of you join us for today's exciting topic. A few important details first. For your participation in today's Lunch and Learn webinar, you're eligible to receive CLE credit. In order to get your certificate, you will need to sign up for the credit by clicking on the link that we'll provide at the end of the webinar. We'll follow up with you to administer a participant survey that's required by the State Bar. Once that's completed, we'll send your continuing education certificate. We also want to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude to CLESPA's lead annual sponsors. These companies and firms provide vital financial support that makes it possible for our community work in immigration, housing, and economic advancement. On behalf of our staff, our board, and the community members that we serve, we thank you so much for your enthusiasm and your participation in our mission. In addition, we want to give a special shout out today to Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati for providing professional development tech support for the webinar and for introducing today's distinguished speakers. Many thanks for your ongoing partnership and your commitment to our local community. And now to kick off today's webinar topic and make the introductions, I'm happy to turn this over to Luke Liss, Senior Counsel and Pro Bono Counsel at Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati. Luke?
Thank you, Patricia. Very nice intro. Hello, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well, staying dry. It's been an interesting couple of days. That rain has been so good, but there's a lot of it. It's difficult to get used to after so long. But it's so great to have everyone here today for Hot Topics of Immigration Law, and a big thank you to CLESPA. I know for Wilson Sonsini, CLESPA has long been one of our best, if not the best partner we have in the immigration space, and we have two outstanding speakers today. So I'm very thrilled to introduce to you all, who many of you may know both of them, but I'd love to introduce them, Christina Dos Santos and Miriam Kelly. So first with Christina. Christina is the director of the immigration program at CLESPA, and she's been at CLESPA for 6 years. Very fast years, time has flown by. For those of you who have done clinics, Christina has always been there running things and doing just such an amazing job and triaging and everything that goes along with this work. Prior to joining CLESPA, Christina worked as an immigration attorney at a nonprofit serving immigrants in DC, and as a contract attorney for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Christina holds a law degree from the University of Oxford and an LLM from the London School of Economics. And as many of you know, she's extremely fluent in Spanish, which is invaluable in this work, as well as just being a great person. And then next, we also have Miriam Kelly, and many of you will know Miriam as well. Miriam is the endlessly patient person who answers all the emails and sets up calls when people have questions for us. And I know how much we appreciate that and how valuable that is, because not all partners are that available, and it's an extremely difficult job. So Miriam is a managing attorney with the Immigration Project and specializes in pursuing remedies such as U-Visa, DACA, and asylum for immigrant youth and their families. And she does both direct casework and supervises attorneys, which we well know. And she, like, as I mentioned, she's the mentor attorney who we all go to help us brainstorm how to get through many of these difficult issues. And some of them we'll talk about today. It's a changing landscape, but some has stayed the same, and it's always very complex and interesting. So Miriam has been with CLESPA since 2013, and before that worked with KIND, Kids in Need of Defense, and out in New Jersey, and represented unaccompanied minors seeking SIJS, asylum, and many other forms of relief. Miriam graduated from Hofstra in New York, where she concentrated in international law, and obviously, again, also fluent in Spanish, something that would be great if we all could be, but something to aspire to. So again, I just want to thank both Miriam and Christina and CLESPA for being here and for all of your wonderful partnership. And with that, I'll turn it over to Miriam and Christina.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Luke, and to Patricia as well. We really appreciate your kind words, and we are so thrilled to have you as a pro bono partner, and just your willingness to take on so many of our cases expands our capacity and makes it so that we can help so many more people than we could if it was just our team of 8 attorneys here at the office. So if we can go to the next slide, please, I'll talk a little bit about this presentation and what we're going to be discussing today. So a little bit about the genesis of this presentation. You know, as Luke mentioned, I have a lot of conversations with attorneys in doing immigration pro bono cases. And a lot of times I get the question, which is like, Miriam, Biden is president now, so is everything okay and fine now? And I would love to be able to say yes, but no, but it's kind of complicated. So that's what this presentation is about, just kind of figuring out what happened in the last 4 years under the Trump administration that kind of threw a wrench into the things with immigration wise. What's gotten better under the Biden administration so far, because there are some things that have gotten better. And then talking about what's largely stayed the same, because you'd be surprised about how many things have stayed the same despite some of the changes that have happened. And then we'll talk next about what's on the horizon. What can we expect in the next few years? What can we hope for in the next few years? And finally, we'll talk about what you can do to help, maybe some pro bono opportunities, opportunities for advocacy to try to get some meaningful immigration reform passed through Congress. And lastly, we'll have a bit of a Q&A session. So anything that's on your minds or anything that's come up during this presentation, we'll have a good opportunity to talk about that. So next slide, please. Okay, so jumping right in. And then I think in terms of questions, we're gonna have an eye on the chat box. So if there's anything little that comes by or you're like, what was that? You know, we're happy to look at that in the chat box. But for larger things, larger themes, you can save that for the Q&A at the very end. So let's do a little bit of a flashback to 2016 to 2020, dark days, in terms of folks who are into immigration and, you know, kind of successful adjudication of things, speedy adjudication of things. Those were things that happened pre-2016 and then have largely changed during that period of time. So if we're talking about what the state of immigration law and policy were under the Trump administration, just kind of specifically talking about USCIS. So US Citizenship and Immigration Services is the arm of the Department of Homeland Security that handles affirmative immigration benefits. So a lot of the common ones that we see at our office, a lot of the common ones that we place with pro bono attorneys from firms are U visas, special immigrant juvenile status for children who are abused, abandoned, or neglected. Oh, and then for folks who are unfamiliar, U visas are going to come up a lot during this presentation, and that's a special visa for folks who were victims of serious crimes and assisted law enforcement, and then are able to obtain an immigration benefit based on their cooperation. Other things that we see in our office are DACA, asylum, VAWA cases. So a lot of those benefits are handled by USCIS, US Citizenship and Immigration Services. So this is what we saw under the Trump administration. Super strict scrutiny. We were getting requests for evidence, denials, rejections, you name it, any kind of procedural implement that they could think of, and boy were they creative, was implemented. There was a fun thing called the blank space policy, which was you had to fill in every single space on every immigration form with an NA or none, even if it didn't apply. Otherwise, they would just kick back forms to you. So that was super frustrating. Any kind of criminal history, even though if it had been previously disclosed, was just being attacked over and over in terms of like, give us more information about this, and we think you're a danger to society because you had, you know, drove without a license in 2007. You know, it got to that level. Another thing that we saw were extremely long processing times. It was really common, and unfortunately still is common. We'll get to that in the what stayed the same section, but a lot of these benefits are taking a very, very long time to process, more than we ever really saw before. When I first started at Aclespa in 2013, I remember the first U visa that I worked on, I think was pending for like 9 months, and then it was approved and I was so excited. I was like, here you go, here's your U visa. It was wonderful. So if you can imagine that processing timeline has now stretched from what was, a matter of months to a year, now to 5 years. So U visas, like a really interesting example that I've seen now is that I have a kid and he just turned 5. And the U visas that I filed while I was, right before maternity leave are with him are the U visas that are only being adjudicated now. So it's like U visas have to be a kindergartner before they are actually adjudicated. So it's just really just a very, very long processing time that only got worse under the Trump administration. And another kind of big bad thing that happened was the NTA, notice to appear policy. So prior to Trump, with certain immigration benefits, especially humanitarian-based, survivor-based forms of relief, it was you apply, if you're approved, great. If you are denied, that's kind of the end of the road. But what happened during the Trump administration was this policy that even if it was a humanitarian or survivor-based type of relief, if somebody applied for something and then got denied, they'd be kicked to deportation proceedings before the immigration court. So that was a huge thing. And that also affected previously filed cases. So if we had a U visa applicant who applied in like 2015 or so, at that time, we were able to say, try this U visa, you may or may not be approved, but there's kind of no really downside because you're not going to be put into deportation, kind of was completely changed and turned on end because at that point, they instituted this policy that said, even if you're some sort of survivor of abuse, or if you're a crime victim who assisted law enforcement, if you don't meet some of the criteria of this, we're going to not only deny you, but put you into removal proceedings before the immigration court to see if you can apply for something before the immigration judge, which was really scary and a sad reality during the Trump administration. So these are just kind of a few of the kind of big bad things that happened during the Trump administration with USCIS. And then I'll turn it over to Christina on the next slide to talk about what happened with the immigration court. Oh, sorry. Before we get to that, DACA. DACA has been a roller coaster. One of my colleagues has called DACA and what's been going on with it the DACA-arena because it's like you're dancing around and there are so many twists and turns and different procedural ups and downs with this program. So for folks who may or may not be, I think everybody knows what DACA is at this point, but it's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And this is a program that was announced in 2012, which was a huge game changer for a lot of folks who were brought to the US as children. And it was definitely one of the biggest developments since the time that I've been an immigration attorney, because kind of the conversation was changed from, I was brought here with my parents and I don't have papers and I don't know what's going to happen to me. And then that turned into, well, at least I have DACA, which affords me work authorization, a protection from deportation. And so folks felt comfortable continuing their education, engaging in meaningful careers, starting families, working long-term jobs. So that was all well and good up until Trump was elected. And in 2017, shortly after starting in office, he announced that DACA was going to be terminated, just completely done away with. You can renew one more time and then you're done. So luckily that went through a lot of different actions in the courts, and through injunctive relief, the program was kept alive for people who are applying for renewals. But for folks who wanted to apply for DACA for the very first time, the program was completely closed to them up until July of 2020, in which there was an update from one of the courts, or so many different court actions, but that allowed folks to apply for initial DACA again. So there are so many different twists and turns that have happened with this, but as of where things were in the Trump administration, it was that as of December 2020, the New York federal judge said that DACA needed to be reopened to everybody, and that's kind of where we were once Biden came to office. So next slide, please. Okay, and I'll turn it over to Christina to talk about immigration court and removal proceedings under the Trump administration.
Okay, before I jump in, I just want to say thanks so much to everybody who's here. Just thrilled to see the turnout and thrilled to have the opportunity to talk everybody's ear off about this stuff. Miriam and I could talk about this all day, every day. So thank you for your time and attention. We appreciate it. So yes, under the Trump administration, lots of terrible things happened in the arena of immigration court as well. Family separation at the border. I mean, I don't think any of us can ever forget the heart-wrenching images and video and audio of children being separated from their parents. Thousands of children were separated, hundreds of which still have not been reunified with their families because their parents were deported to violence-torn countries, and it's been really, really difficult to reunify some of those children. We've worked with some families who have been reunified, and the degree of trauma for those children is enormous. So those children and us, we will be continuing to deal with that in perpetuity, that policy, even though it's no longer in effect. The other really, really damaging policy was the Remain in Mexico. The kind of Orwellian official name for that is Migrant Protection Protocol. Of course, it does completely the opposite. It forces people to stay in kind of squalid camp-like settings on the Mexican side of the border and only be permitted to enter the US just for the day of their hearing. So obviously there's huge due process issues there. They don't have access to counsel. It's really dangerous there on the border. We've worked with people who missed their hearings because they were kidnapped by a criminal group on the date of their hearing, et cetera. It's just really difficult conditions. And we'll talk later about the state of that under Biden. There were also some attorney general decisions that came down under Trump that attempted to eviscerate asylum law entirely, attempted to say, no one who's a victim of domestic violence, no one who's a victim of gang violence is eligible for asylum. They were really legally dubious decisions. And so good judges were able to get around them, but judges who kind of just wanted to deny anyway were able to just rubber stamp a bunch of denials. And then there were some crazy filing fee increases proposed by the Trump administration, some that would increase the filing fees in immigration court by as much as 9 times the original amount. So in order to prevent your deportation, you had to pay huge amounts of money, which many people could not afford. This is dear to our hearts because we were a plaintiff in federal litigation seeking to challenge those increases, and they were stayed as a result of that. Next slide. And back to Mary.
So that's kind of like a recap of what was going on, just like, kind of really just like the surface, because there were just so many court decisions and things being referred to the attorney general and policy changes. I mean, it got to the point, which we're still doing this in our office, but we meet pretty much like every other week, just like with the attorneys and the other staff, just to like sift through all of the different changes that were happening and to be able to read through all the different developments that were happening to keep us up to date. It was really, really difficult. So now we're transitioning to 2021, Biden is president, and this is the point where a lot of the pro bonos that I work with, they're like, so everything's okay now, is everything gone? And so let's start with the positive. So focusing on the positive. So Biden administration, what's gotten better so far? So I think like the first thing in terms of like the US Citizenship and Immigration Services realm, a big development that happened only this summer was the U visa bona fide determination, BFD policy. So as I mentioned previously, U visas, that's the special visa for folks who are victims and who assisted law enforcement with investigation. Those petitions take forever. It takes 5 years. And so a lot of folks assume that, oh, if it takes so long, do they get to like apply for something in the interim? And for the longest time, the answer was no. So those cases that I filed in 2016 really had radio silence, nothing until they were ready to be adjudicated as of this year. So that means it was 5 years of not having any kind of access to work authorization. It was really just like continuing on in their undocumented state and all the instability that goes along with that for such a long period of time. So the recent development with this BFD policy is that it's an attempt to kind of work through the backlogs that are happening. So some of the backlogs with U visas are prescribed by Congress. There's a cap on the number of U visas, only 10,000 per year, which maybe from like 2008 to 2013 or 14 or so, like that was enough. There weren't as many people applying for U visas. So the number of statutorily available visas was matching the number of people who are applying. But since then, as word has spread in the community about the availability of these visas, I think there's increased people reporting when crimes have been committed against them. And from increased reporting and increased cooperation with the police comes increased number of applications. So now that 10,000 per year is nowhere near the amount of visas for the number of folks who are applying on a yearly basis. So they kind of have to stagger out the adjudications, and which is contributing to that long backlog. So with this new policy, they're trying to go through the backlog by combing through all of the U visas that have been pending. And so long as they meet baseline criteria, meaning that they were indeed the victim of a crime, that they have done their background checks, and it doesn't appear that there is like a risk to public safety or to the community based on that person's biometrics check, and that the U visa was properly filed, then they'll make kind of like a pre-type of approval adjudication, which means that they can be in deferred action status, meaning that there's not going to be any adverse immigration action taken against them, and that they get a work authorization, employment authorization EAD card that's good for 4 years. So the hope is that they'll comb through the backlog. So far, it's still like these BFD determinations are still cases that were filed in 2016 or so. So they're still a ways away from keeping up with the backlog that's been created. But the hope is that with getting this pre-approval BFD employment authorization document that's good for 4 years, that will help them a little bit through the long wait for the actual visa when that's available. So we're hoping for congressional change so that it won't be that much of a wait for that allocation of 10,000 visas per year, but at least like the BFD policy, assuming that they're going to keep moving forward, will make it so that eventually somebody will not have to wait so long to at least get their work authorization card, which allows them to work legally, to get a social security number, to get an unrestricted driver's license, and all those good things. So next slide, please. We can go on to Christina and talk about the immigration court and positive things.
Yes, so some wonderful things that have happened since Biden took office. One is that those attorney general decisions in the area of asylum that I referenced before that attempted to make blanket statements around no survivors of domestic violence or gang violence being eligible for asylum, those have been overturned. And so we're kind of back to how things were before Trump took office with respect to making arguments around who is or is not eligible for asylum. And there's, especially in our circuit, plenty of good case law to show that especially survivors of domestic violence should be eligible for asylum, and also victims of gang violence, depending on their circumstances. Another good, really great thing that has happened under Biden is ICE. ICE has multiple functions, right? ICE conducts raids in workplaces. They're, responsible for internal enforcement of immigration laws. They also have a legal branch that is responsible for undertaking the deportation cases in immigration court. So when we go to immigration court, our opposing counsel are attorneys who work for ICE. So those attorneys are now allowed to exercise some form of prosecutorial discretion where they can work with us in order to kind of take cases off the docket that really don't need to be there. So an example of one of those, at CLESPA, we're working with a pair of siblings, a brother and sister. They are 10 and 12 years old. They fled to the United States from Mexico after their family home was shot at by cartels. The children managed to escape with their lives and came here, and they're staying with an aunt who's taking care of them. They're eligible for a special immigrant juvenile status, and they have an approved special immigrant juvenile status petition. They just have to wait several years for green card eligibility because of backlogs in that area. But there's really no need for them to be in active deportation proceedings because it's been recognized that they deserve protection and should be here. But under the Trump administration, with no discretion possible by ICE, ICE had to move forward with all of those deportation cases, regardless of the circumstances. But here, it's now possible, and we just got their removal proceedings terminated. So we were able to talk to the ICE attorneys and agree that this case should be closed while they wait for their green cards. So huge relief for the family, not having the children have to go to court every few months and argue why they shouldn't be deported. Next slide. Back to Miriam.
So sadly, the what's gotten better portion of the presentation was already concluded. Christina and I were meeting about this and we were like, this was a little better, this is better, but that's kind of it. You know, of course, there's nuance within those categories, but those are kind of like the major developments, obviously, that have such an impact on our clients in the various stages of their immigration journeys. But kind of some of the big things that we are hoping for, we are still hoping for them. And in some instances, some things have gotten worse, a lot worse. So one of those things that's unfortunately gotten worse since Biden took office is DACA. So where I left off, where things were as of December of 2020 under Trump, is that a New York federal judge ruled that the Trump administration could fully restore DACA as of December 4th of 2020. So that was really exciting for us and for our clients and for the families of our clients, because while we were able steadily since 2017, in which the initial rescission of DACA happened, we've been able to steadily help folks with DACA renewal, but that really left out a huge category of people who had never applied for DACA before and were initial first-time filers and were foreclosed that entire time. So this was really common. I get that question a lot of like, why didn't people apply for DACA back when it was open? And there's a variety of reasons for that. Some folks were just absolutely ineligible at the time. You have to be at least 15 years old in order to apply for DACA. And a lot of people were, you know, little kids when DACA first came out, and but for the age, they were not able to meet the criteria. So that left out a huge category of people. And another thing is that some folks just were afraid of applying and making themselves known. It takes like a leap of faith in your government to apply for an immigration benefit and make yourself known after you've been living in the shadows your entire life. So a lot of folks were kind of hesitant and then lost their chance, unfortunately. So when this federal judge back in December of 2020 ruled that the program was going to be open again, it was game time. We were really, really excited because we just had lists upon lists of folks who were eligible for this. So I'll talk about an example of a family. So there is this one young woman who came to us in 2016 or so, and she was totally eligible. We helped her. It was great. And since then, she has two younger brothers that were too young to be able to partake in DACA, and they have just been waiting and waiting and waiting, and they see all the benefits that her sister was able to get, and they wanted to be able to get those too. So we, our office has just been so filled with capacity, so we really rely on pro bono attorneys from firms to help us and take on these new matters that we don't have space for with our current attorneys' dockets and caseloads. So we had a big rush of folks that came to us for first-time initial DACA filing. So that client, her two little brothers, were placed with pro bono attorneys and just started the process of being able to get all their documentation together, proving all of the requirements that they've been living in the US since at least 2012 or 2007 and through 2012 through the present. And we placed those cases with pro bono attorneys and they were pretty much ready to go, but then bam, July 16th, 2021, there was another major setback because there's this lawsuit in Texas. Southern District of Texas has just been a thorn in DACA's side from the beginning. So there's this judge that's kind of out for it with DACA, Judge Hanen in Texas, who issued a ruling saying that, well, essentially that the whole DACA program is illegal and that it needs to just be defunct, but stayed that part of his ruling and only applied it to folks who had never applied for DACA before. So that brought us back to where we were as of 2017, whereas you applied already, you're applying for renewals, you are fine, but initial filers are not foreclosed upon applying, but it's ruled that USCIS cannot make decisions on those applications. So if you're talking about those two little brothers that were held with pro bono attorneys, they filed those applications, they've been received by USCIS, but until there's some sort of movement with Congress or with the courts, those applications are just frozen and on hold and they're not able to adjudicate them. So that's a huge bummer because we were hoping to be able to help so many people who, for one reason or another, missed the boat with DACA the first time and have been waiting for something since this all went down in 2017. So unfortunately, they're still on hold, and so that's pretty frustrating. And we were hoping that the Biden administration would do something, play more of a proactive role in how this would turn out. All we got so far was just this attempt to run DACA through the Administrative Procedures Act notice and comments, which was just kind of trying to like go through the regular channels of what they should have done back in 2012 for the program as it was then, but not really doing anything to protect folks who are trying to apply for it now. So that's been pretty disappointing. And we have heard that the federal government is appealing this decision to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. So we'll stay tuned and see what other twists and turns it's going to take. But for the moment, renewal is good, initial filers on hold, frozen. Next slide, please. Christina.
All right, so some of the things that have gotten worse since Biden took office, I don't know if you all recall during the Obama administration, there was a surge of unaccompanied minors and families at the border that was reported on widely in the news. And as a response to this, the Obama administration put into place what we called rocket dockets. So these specialized dockets in immigration court for families and children, forcing judges to adjudicate those cases quickly. The only reasonable explanation for this is it's some way to try to tell people back in the home countries, don't come here. You won't be able to just hang out and wait for your case. Like, you are going to get deported quickly. And it's happening again. It's got a new name. It's called dedicated dockets, but it's exactly the same type of effect. Families who came here since May of 2021 are forced to have their cases expedited. And you would think, oh, isn't it a good thing to have my case expedited? I can get a quick answer on my case. I mean, that might be true in other contexts, but in the case of immigration court, we have these families coming here. They don't speak the language. They don't have resources to pay for private counsel to represent them. In immigration court, you have no right to a court-appointed attorney. So you're going to be proceeding without an attorney unless you find one for yourself. Free attorneys like ourselves are few and far between. And so for people to have to go forward, it pretty much means deportation, because if you don't have an attorney, you're 90% more likely to be deported because you can't present your case properly and no one's going to help you do it. So this is extremely disturbing. And yeah, it is what it is. The other thing that's really disturbing are these return of service dockets that San Francisco Immigration Court has started doing. They've started holding special dockets for people whose hearing notices have been returned as undelivered, and basically just ordering all those people removed in absentia. Why the court would decide to use their limited resources on people who have issues of return of service is mind-boggling. We have all these cases where people have representation and have been waiting for years and years and years and just want to get their day in court. And instead of giving those people a chance to have their day in court, they're spending time on these dedicated dockets, which is people who largely don't have attorneys, and return of service dockets where people, have moved and haven't had a chance to hear about their hearing. And so all those people are just being ordered removed. Next slide.
So continuing the what's gotten worse trend, there's been a lot of bad stuff happening with two countries in particular. One is Afghanistan, one is Haiti. So starting with Afghanistan. So as of the end of August of 2021, there was a deadline set by President Biden to completely remove the US forces from the country after being there for more than 20 years. And that deadline actually did come to pass. And days ahead even of that August 31st deadline, the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan, effectively depriving women and girls of educational opportunities, employment opportunities, just a lot of the progress, unfortunately, that was made in the last 20 plus years was undone really swiftly once the Taliban came back into power. So this has prompted a huge need for folks in Afghanistan who want to get out. And with the Taliban in control of the passport offices, in control of the embassy, there's kind of like no more functions at the embassy there. So this has created an issue where there's just like thousands upon thousands of folks who have ties to the United States, either by having worked as defense contractors for US-based organizations that have been conducting operations in Afghanistan for the last 20 years, or they have family members who are concerned for their safety and would like to be living with them in the United States. There's just like a multitude of issues that are coming to pass because of this Taliban takeover. So what does this mean in terms of immigration and what can be done for them? A lot of immigration remedies are only available once a person is in the United States. And especially because there's no embassy functioning in Afghanistan and the airports are pretty much shut down. There's no planes going in and out unless they're like special charter planes. It's created an issue where there's very few options for folks who are still living there and on the ground, just trying to stay safe until something can happen for them. So one of the things that we've been involved with at CLESPA, but on a smaller scale, and other organizations have been involved on a much larger scale, is coordinating applications for humanitarian parole. So in the days since August 31st of 2021, I can't remember what the statistic is, but I think it's something along, there's just tens of thousands of humanitarian parole applications that have been filed with USCIS. I think within our office, I helped a family of 7, another, person in our office helped a family of 9, and then just the applications are just in the thousands at this point for this special parole application, which says that if a person with ties to the United States is in fear of their life and would like to have special permission to be paroled into the United States to seek other immigration remedies once they're here, whether it's through asylum or through a family-based petition or special immigrant visas, SIVs, for those folks who have assisted US-based defense contractors. So all of that is in limbo at the moment. No humanitarian parole applications have been approved or adjudicated in any way since August 31st of 2021. So there's just like thousands upon thousands that are on hold. And there hasn't really been an announcement from USCIS in terms of any additional resources to be helping with these applications or any kind of like what's going to happen. So that's been really, really hard to manage. But we still are, encouraging folks who are interested in volunteer opportunities. We can connect you with the folks that are coordinating this if you have any interest in filling out humanitarian parole applications for Afghan evacuees. And so after Afghanistan, Haiti, what's been going on in Haiti? So we were very surprised to see that the Biden administration has resumed deportation flights to Haiti. For a long time, there were no deportations that were happening to Haiti because of political instability. There's so many deadly earthquakes that have happened over and over. But as of this September, there's been 37 flights that have landed in Haiti with like almost 4,000 folks on board. Almost half of them are women and children. So there has been a little bit of positivity for the folks in Haiti who have not been ordered deported. There has been a temporary protected status that's been issued for certain Haitians already living in the United States, so they can apply for work authorization and protection from deportation. But the deportation flights are happening, and it's just been a really sad thing that this has occurred because we thought that things were going to be going differently. Okay, next slide, please. And backlogs. So if we're talking about, things that are not necessarily worse, but have stayed the same in the Biden administration. One of the things that we could talk about are those USCIS backlogs that I've referred to earlier in the presentation. Things are still very, very, very slow at USCIS, not only with forms of relief that have traditionally taken a long time, but it's kind of like everything is taking a super long time to process. Applications for employment authorization, renewals, for example, that should take, 4 months, maybe 6 months as of a few years ago, are now taking 6 to 9 to 12 months even. And that's just to renew a card for something that they already had. So an example of this is that I have a longtime client who is an asylum seeker from Guatemala. She has her individual hearing that was supposed to go on during the pandemic in May of 2020. It was kicked out to June of 2023. So just because of COVID and the court being shut down, it was kicked out to 2023. I hope it's not going to have to take that long, but in the meantime, while she's waiting for her day in court to apply for asylum, she is eligible for employment authorization. And that card used to take 4 months or so to process. And now we're waiting. I think we're going on like 7 months of waiting. And like, no matter what I do, I cannot get it unstuck. So I'm presenting some stats here that I learned from a federal court action. I think it was one of the districts in Maryland, in which some visa applicants with kind of employment-based visas were suing the federal government. And they published the transcript of what happened in that hearing. And we learned a little bit about kind of like what are the inner workings of USCIS and how come there are all these backlogs. So that was really interesting to read about. So one of the things is that, the USCIS processes 7 million types of benefits per year. And one of these things I think that folks don't really know is that US Citizenship and Immigration Services is fee funded through applications. They don't get hardly anything in terms of federal funding. So it's the visa fees, the USCIS application fees that are funding all their operations. So in 2020, with the pandemic, there was a significant decrease in the number of applications filed as we were all sheltering in place. So the less revenue they have, the less opportunity they have to hire people on and help work through backlogs. So there's been a significant reduction in their ability to hire and their spending. So this has caused an agency-wide hiring freeze, and that's going to be continuing on into the foreseeable future without some kind of special allocation. So this really affects every type of immigration benefit that people are applying for. And there is some kind of prioritization. Sorry, I think my son just got home. There is a prioritization based on how important that benefit is. They're supposed to be prioritizing initial and renewal applications for employment authorization, but from what I've seen, it's still a really, really huge backlog and a huge problem. So next slide, please.
All right, so bringing us back to the Remain in Mexico policy, it is still in place. Credit to Biden, he did try to get rid of it, but one of our friendly federal judges in Texas ordered it had to be reinstated. And the US Supreme Court refused to block that ruling or to issue a stay. So Remain in Mexico is still in place at this time. Next slide. So congressional action. All right. Immigration advocates and Democrats who want to see something happen for immigration wanted to use the budget reconciliation process as a way to push through some changes because you would only need Senate Democrats by a simple majority to make changes in that way. But those efforts have been essentially scuppered because the Senate parliamentarian found that the suggested changes, which would have allowed a path for citizenship for DACA recipients, for farm workers, for people with temporary protected status, that was not allowable under budget reconciliation because the actual policy impact outweighed the budget impact. Democrats tried with a plan B that was kind of to update old amnesty policies to try and see if we could bring amnesty a little more up to date, but that also got scuppered by the Senate parliamentarian. They're now on to a plan C, which would be to just kind of increase options for parole, which kind of gives people potentially the ability to work and things like that. But we're unfortunately, we haven't seen what we had hoped to see in this area. Next slide.
So that brings us to what can you do to help? So, we've kind of talked a little bit about all the twists and turns of things that have happened with the various immigration remedies and, kind of forward progress or lack of forward progress so far in this administration. But despite all of that, there are still so many folks who need assistance. So if a lot of this stuff has angered you or you feel frustrated, this is a kind of a call to action about something you can do. And one thing is to maybe take on a pro bono case under our mentorship. So as Luke mentioned, I'm kind of like the substantive mentor for technical support whenever folks feel like taking on a pro bono matter under the firm. And there are a few different types of immigration relief that we are offering in our pro bono offerings. So U visas, asylum cases, naturalization for folks who are applying to become US citizens who are already permanent residents. And I think we have asylum on there twice. Yeah, I think we mean asylum and removal for families. And then we also have asylum and other remedies for children who are in proceedings as well. So if you are interested in any type of pro bono case, whether it's like a long-term thing or maybe on a more of a short-term basis, we have opportunities. So please do get in touch, and we're always thankful and looking for more opportunities to increase our service offerings through pro bono attorneys at firms. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then in terms of what can you do to help in terms of advocacy, there are a few different ways to get involved on the kind of like advocacy basis rather than doing direct service work. You can urge Congress to create a pathway to citizenship for people who are undocumented. Also, those visa backlogs that I mentioned, those could be potentially solvable through Congress as well. So you can email your legislators. We've put in a couple of links to tools there to finding your member of Congress and ways to contact your member of Congress. And then that link from NILC, the National Immigration Law Center, is really cool because you'll go to that link, enter in your zip code, and it shows who your representatives are. And then they have really easy tools to be able to kind of cut and paste certain letters that they've already put together in terms of immigration agenda to reach out to your representatives and make it known that this is something that you care about and would like to see some sort of change. And especially now with, like as Christina mentioned, with that spending bill and the reconciliation, it's been really disappointing that it hasn't gone anywhere. And we really do need some sort of legislative advocacy here for our clients because a lot of this instability is really, really difficult for them. And we're just hoping for more opportunities for different immigration avenues to open up for them. Because as we can see, having immigration status obviously is not the cure to all of their problems, but it's a really great way to make sure that you can get your education, to keep working, to keep your family together, to make sure that kids are not growing up with fear that their family members are going to be deported or that they're going to be deported along with their families. So this is definitely something that's near and dear to our hearts. And so one way or another, if you can find a way to devote some time, whether it's by taking a case or reaching out to your member of Congress, it's a really great thing to do. And we would very much appreciate it, as would our clients. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that leads us to questions. So we can do this a couple of ways. I believe you guys can go ahead and use the chat function to ask a question and we can answer it here. And I think there's also an ability to, if you would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. So I just wanted to offer up that opportunity here. While we're waiting for questions, so thanks again to Luke from Wilson Sonsini for hosting us today and giving us an opportunity to chat about these things. As Christina and I mentioned, we can just talk about this all day, and we do. So it's really a great opportunity for us to be able to share some of the things that are going on in our day-to-day lives, and with the hope that it kind of encourage some of you to reach out with any kind of interest that you may have in taking on a case or anything else that you might want to do.
Absolutely. Thanks so much to both of you and for all you do. And I would say for Wilson Sonsini folks, we do have some existing cases that could use some help too. So please feel free to reach out to myself or Chitra Prandaman if you're interested. or if you want to take on new things, that's great as well. I'm sure we'll be doing that sometime soon. So yeah, thank you both, and thanks to CLESPA. Anyone has questions? Don't be shy. Okay.
Hi, Miriam, and can you guys hear me, Christina? Perfect. So I do have one question. I noticed that lately USCIS is not issuing the amount of notices that they typically used to do whenever you submit applications or renewal applications for employment, right? At times we get now a notice that allows you to set up an account access, an online account access, right? And before it used to be where you get the receive notice, you know, basically notifying you, okay, we're on receipt of your application, and then there's typically a notice to the attorney and a notice to the client. In a few occasions, they've been only sending one notice instead of the two of them, and it's either like the attorney or the client that gets it. And then there'll be a second notice notifying the client that they have about 90 days to set up an online account access, right? And then if we're successful with setting up that access, we go online and we can see the application or PDFs of the application as they were received, and also a copy of that particular notice. But one of the issues, like we actually were just dealing with last week, was in a particular case, we were expecting to see that receipt notice indicating there was an automated extension of 180 days, right, for the current EAD. Now, the problem is, in absence of that receipt, what can we do, right? Because I know the attorney was trying to reach out to USCIS and see if we can get that specific notice issue or some type of notification that the application for employment had that automatic extension, but we have not been able to confirm that. So have you guys seen this issue for some of your clients, or have you heard about this at all?
A little bit, yeah. So I just think like across the board, I don't know if it's USCIS doing it or if it's a mail issue or both, but we have not received notices, or like we'll get something and the client won't get it and vice versa. So typically what we say is that if you know that you should have gotten a receipt for something, you should either do like a request, like a help request, depending on the type of case. You can do that either through USCIS's phone number and see if they can like reissue a receipt, or you can write a letter to the service center that is in charge of that type of case and see if they can reissue that receipt. If it's a U visa case, you can email the hotline, depending on which office that it's in, and just say like, hey, we are missing this receipt. Please resubmit it to us, and see kind of what you can do from there. But it has happened a lot where, like all those backlogs that I were talking about and the fact that they're so under-resourced. I think a lot of USCIS officers are still working from home, and things are definitely not what they once were in terms of like receipts even being issued at all, or we're even seeing that it takes like 3 months or something for a receipt to even get to us. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of problems, but reach out to USCIS depending on which type of application it is and see if they can reproduce that. And the online account access thing, they're really trying to push that. That's like their move into the 21st century, but like it's really still super buggy and not helpful to have an online account portal. Like we don't really set them up a whole lot for our clients. There's only like a few applications in which it's like helpful to have that. Like if you're applying for naturalization, you can set up an online account and apply for that online through e-filing. But for the majority of things that you guys are working on, the online account access doesn't really do anything yet, but we're hoping that that'll change. But because of all those budget cuts and lack of application fees, a lot of their technology advancements that they promised are still yet to come. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Christina. A great question, Rodolfo. Thank you for asking and for all the work that you do to help move those cases forward.
Well, it's teamwork. We have behind us a bunch of people, that are very happy to participate, like Candida, Shitra, Rosemary Dean, she's just like a key element on all this processing that we do, Franchette Garcia. So, we're glad that we're able to help and, make an impact on the work that we do out there. And thank you for your time as well. For you and Christina, you guys are always available, to help us, and assist us whenever we need it. So thank you very much. And thank you for your time on this presentation. Great presentation as well. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rodolfo. Okay, I don't think I see any more messages in terms of questions. So let's maybe go and talk about the MCLE certification on the next slide. Patricia, I don't know if you wanted to say something about the MCLE certificate.
Just a quick reminder that if you can use the link that's in the chat, it's also on this slide. You need to let us know that you want to claim the credit, and we'll be happy to launch you into that process after this session's over. So just fill that form out and you'll be on your way. Yeah, and I think we're at the close here. So on behalf of Community Legal Services in East Palo Alto, thank you very much for joining us today.